The first time I heard my daughter's fiancé talk about what he planned to do after the wedding, I was sitting 3 feet in front of him, wearing a black driver's cap, staring through the windshield like I hadn't heard a word. That was the trick with men like Preston Vale. They never believed the help was listening. They never believed the old man holding the steering wheel might have a name, a family, a daughter. Especially not his daughter. Preston leaned back in the leather seat of my town car that morning, one ankle resting over his knee, phone pressed to his ear, smiling at his own reflection in the window. "No," he said with a quiet laugh. "She doesn't know yet." Traffic was slow on the interstate, rain crawling down the glass in thin silver lines. I kept both hands on the wheel. The voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear. Preston laughed again. "After the wedding, she won't have a choice. The house goes first, then the job. I'm not starting married life with her still running back to her father every time she gets nervous." My hands tightened just slightly, not enough for him to notice. He had no idea the old driver in front of him was the father he was talking about. "My name is Martin Hale. I am 63 years old, a widower, and for most of my life I owned a small appliance repair shop outside Dayton, Ohio. I fixed refrigerators, washing machines, old ovens people swore were dead until I found one burned wire behind the panel. After my wife Grace passed, the shop felt too quiet. The house felt worse, so I sold the business to my nephew and took a part-time job driving executives to work. It gave me a reason to wake up early, a reason to shave, a reason not to sit alone at the kitchen table listening to silence. That was how I met Preston. Or rather, that was how Preston failed to meet me. Every Monday through Friday, I picked him up outside his downtown apartment at exactly 7:15. He never said good morning. He never asked how I was. Most days he tossed his leather bag across the back seat like the car existed only to receive it. To him, I was a uniform, a mirror, a steering wheel with gray hair. The strange thing was, Preston had eaten dinner in my home twice. He was engaged to my daughter Claire. At family dinners he wore a different face. Polished, charming, expensive smile. He brought wine, complimented the food, asked just enough questions to appear thoughtful, then somehow turned every answer into a story about himself. Claire loved him, or at least she loved the version of him he performed for her. And because Claire had already lost her mother, because I was terrified of becoming the kind of father who turned every boyfriend into an enemy, I tried to be fair. I ignored the little things at first. The way he corrected her in front of people, the way he touched the back of her neck when he wanted her to stop talking, the way Claire's laugh became smaller whenever he entered the room. But that morning, as Preston kept talking behind me, I finally understood something. This wasn't confidence. It was a plan. Preston kept his voice low, but not careful. Careful men lower their voices because they respect privacy. Preston lowered his because he enjoyed having secrets. "Claire thinks we're staying in Dayton for at least a year," he said. That was never going to happen. I looked at him through the rearview mirror for half a second. He was smiling. Not nervous, not conflicted. Smiling. The person on the phone must have asked about Claire's work, because Preston sighed like her career was a minor inconvenience. "She's a teacher," he said. "She'll find another school. Or she won't. Honestly, once we're married, I'd rather she focus on the home for a while." The home. Not our home. The home. I had heard men use language like that before. Not violent men necessarily. Not the kind who slammed fists into walls. Sometimes they were quieter than that. Cleaner. Better dressed. Men who built cages out of concern and called it love. Preston continued. "Her father is the only problem." That sentence landed in my chest like a hammer. "He's old, but she listens to him," he said. "Once I get her away from him, she'll settle down." I kept driving. That was one thing years of repair work had taught me. When something dangerous sparks behind a wall, you do not panic and rip everything apart. You cut the power. You trace the wire. You find the source. So I said nothing. When we pulled up outside Preston's office tower, he ended the call, grabbed his bag, and stepped out without looking at me. "Tomorrow, 7:15, he said. Not a question, an order. "Yes, sir," I answered. He walked away before the words finished leaving my mouth. For 10 minutes, I sat at the curb with the engine running, watching people in expensive coats hurry through the rain. I told myself there could be context. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was becoming exactly what Claire feared after her mother died, a lonely old man looking for someone to blame. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. That Sunday, Claire came over for dinner. She brought lemon pie from the bakery her mother used to love. That nearly broke me before the conversation even started. Claire had Grace's eyes, Grace's patience, and the same dangerous habit of believing people could become better if you loved them hard enough. Halfway through dinner, I asked carefully, "Have you and Preston talked about moving?" Claire looked up from her plate. "Moving?" I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "After the wedding." She smiled. "Dad, we're staying here. My school is here. You're here." I nodded slowly. "Preston knows that?" She laughed. "Of course he knows that." That was the moment the room changed for me. Because two people were planning the same marriage, but only one of them knew the future Preston had already chosen. Over the next 2 weeks I listened more closely. I hated myself for it sometimes. Every morning Preston climbed into the back seat and treated my silence like furniture. He spoke to bankers, realtors, a man named Graham, and once, a lawyer whose name I wrote down the second Preston left the car. There was a house listing in Indianapolis, a contract clause Claire had not seen, a joint account Preston wanted opened before the honeymoon, and then, on a Thursday morning, came the sentence I could not ignore. "Once her name is on the account," Preston said, "it'll be easier to manage what she spends." I stared straight ahead. In the mirror, Preston smiled, and for the first time, I stopped wondering whether I should interfere. I started wondering how to make my daughter see the truth, without losing her forever. For 3 days, I said nothing to Claire. Not because I lacked courage, because I knew my daughter. If I walked into her life waving accusations, Preston would become the victim before the sun went down. He would hold her hands, lower his voice, and say I was grieving, lonely, overprotective. He would tell her I had never really accepted him, and the worst part was, some of that would sound believable. So I waited. Waiting is harder than people think. It is easy to act when anger is hot. It is much harder to sit with what you know and choose the right moment instead of the fastest one. My sister Ruth was the only person I told. She was 70, sharp as a tack, and had never liked Preston. We sat in her kitchen on Saturday morning while she rolled biscuit dough like it had personally offended her. "He doesn't want a wife," she said after I finished explaining. "He wants a tenant with a ring." I almost laughed. Almost. "What do I do?" Ruth dusted flour from her hands and looked at me. "You don't tell Claire what to believe. You show her what he's hiding." That was the same thought I had been afraid to admit. The next Monday, Preston got in the car already on the phone. "Yeah, the venue is perfect," he said. I pulled into traffic. "The rehearsal dinner?" he continued. "No. Bigger than that. I want both families there, friends too. If I announce it in front of everyone, Claire won't make a scene." My stomach tightened. He paused, listening. Then he laughed. "She'll be emotional at first, but she'll come around. Women like big gestures." A big gesture. That was what he called it. Not manipulation. Not pressure. Not forcing my daughter to accept a life she had never agreed to in front of a room full of people. A big gesture. By the time I dropped him off, I knew exactly what he was planning. Preston had booked the private dining room at the Grand Mercer Hotel for what Claire believed was a simple engagement celebration. Family, close friends, champagne, speeches. But Preston was going to use it to announce their move. The house, the joint account, maybe even her resignation from school. All of it wrapped in applause so she would look ungrateful if she objected. That night, Claire called me. For a few minutes, we talked like nothing was wrong. Her students, the weather, a loose cabinet door in her kitchen she wanted me to fix. Then she said, "Dad, can you please try with Preston this weekend?" I closed my eyes. "I have been trying. I mean really try." Her voice sounded tired. "He says you barely talk to him. He thinks you don't respect him." I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the empty chair where Grace used to sit, and felt a sadness so deep it almost became anger. "Claire," I said carefully, "do you feel respected by him?" Silence. Not long, but long enough. Then she answered too quickly. "Of course." That told me everything. The celebration was 4 days away, and my daughter was still defending a man whose plans for her life were sitting in the back seat of my car every morning, spoken aloud like she was already property. The next day, Preston left a folder behind. He did not notice. Of course he didn't. Men who treat people like furniture forget what they leave on the table. I opened it only after parking. Inside were printed pages from the Grand Mercer, a speech outline, a mortgage pre-approval, and one page titled, "Claire Transition Plan." I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I took a photo of every page. The Grand Mercer Hotel had marble floors, gold lights, and the kind of quiet music rich people use to make bad news sound elegant. Claire looked beautiful that night. That was the hardest part. She wore a blue dress her mother would have loved, her hair pinned back, her smile soft but nervous. When she saw me near the entrance, she hugged me longer than usual. "Please be nice tonight," she whispered. I looked over her shoulder. Preston was across the room, laughing with 2 men in tailored suits, one hand around a glass of champagne, performing confidence like it was a second skin. "I'll be calm," I said. Claire pulled back and studied my face. "That's not the same thing." No, it wasn't. For the first hour, I said almost nothing. I watched Preston move through the room, shaking hands, accepting compliments, acting like the evening already belonged to him. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the small stage near the front, waiting. He had always liked an audience. Around 8 o'clock, a hotel manager dimmed the lights. Conversations softened. Glasses were filled. Preston stepped onto the stage with a microphone, smiling like a man about to receive an award. "Everyone," he said, "thank you for being here to celebrate the beginning of our future. Our future." I watched Claire smile up at him. Then I watched Preston begin to steal it. He spoke beautifully at first, about love, commitment, building a life together. He thanked my family, his family, their friends, even me. When he said my name, his eyes moved over me without recognition. That almost made me laugh. Then his voice brightened. "And because marriage is about bold new beginnings, I wanted tonight to be more than a celebration." Claire's smile faltered. Preston reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "I am proud to announce that Claire and I will be starting our married life in Indianapolis, where I've already secured a wonderful home for us." The room burst into applause, for 3 seconds. Then people began noticing Claire. She was not clapping. She was not smiling. She was staring at Preston as if he had started speaking another language. "What home?" she asked. The microphone caught it. The applause died piece by piece. Preston laughed softly. "The one I told you I was looking into." Claire shook her head. "You said you were browsing." A few guests turned toward each other. Preston's smile tightened. "Sweetheart, this is the surprise." "No," Claire said, her voice clearer now. "A surprise is flowers. Not a house in another city." I stood then. Slowly, no shouting, no drama, just an old driver stepping out from the corner of the room. Preston saw me and frowned. Then he looked again. The color left his face before I said a word. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked at my daughter, not at him. "Claire," I said, "ask him when he planned to tell you about the joint account." The room went completely still. Preston lowered the microphone. "Martin, this is not appropriate." I nodded. "You're right. Planning my daughter's life behind her back wasn't appropriate either." Claire turned toward him. "What joint account?" Preston opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. I handed Claire the printed photos from the folder he had left in my car. The mortgage, the speech outline, the account notes. The page titled, "Claire Transition Plan." She read that one twice. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but they were not helpless tears. They were the kind people cry when the truth finally stops hiding. "You had a transition plan for me?" she asked. Preston whispered, "I was doing this for us." Claire took off her engagement ring. "No," she said. "You were doing it to me." For a moment, Preston just stared at the ring in his palm. The room was silent enough to hear someone set down a glass. Then he tried to recover. That was what men like Preston did when control slipped. They reached for softer words, warmer eyes, a wounded voice. "Claire," he said, "you're overwhelmed. This is a lot to process." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, because even then, with every hidden plan exposed in front of both families, he was still trying to explain her own feelings to her. "No," she said, "I'm finally processing it." Preston stepped down from the stage. "I love you." "I believe you," Claire whispered. That surprised him. It surprised me too. But my daughter kept going. "I believe you love the version of me that fits into the life you already designed. I believe you love being needed. I believe you love making decisions." Her voice broke, but she did not look away. "But you never loved me as an equal." Preston looked around the room, desperate now, searching for someone to rescue him from the truth. No one moved. Even his own mother had one hand over her mouth, eyes full of shame. He turned toward me. "You ruined this." I shook my head. "No, I drove you to work. You did the talking." That was the line that ended it. 10 minutes later, Preston walked out of the Grand Mercer alone, carrying his speech, his ring, and the future he had built without asking the woman who was supposed to live in it. Claire did not cry until we reached the parking lot. Then she folded into my arms, like she had when she was little, and the world had become too big for her to carry alone. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. I held her tighter. "No, you trusted someone you loved. That is not stupid." But I defended him, because you wanted him to be who he promised he was. For a long time, we stood beneath the hotel lights while cars passed on the wet street behind us. I thought about Grace then, about what she would have said. She would have brushed Claire's hair away from her face and reminded her that heartbreak is not failure. It is proof that your heart was still brave enough to try. The weeks after that were not easy. Claire was embarrassed, angry, grieving a future that had never truly belonged to her. Some days she thanked me. Other days she barely answered my calls. I accepted both. Protecting someone does not mean they owe you immediate peace. But slowly she came back to herself. She kept her teaching job. She repainted her kitchen yellow. She started meeting friends again on Friday nights. And one Sunday, she came over with a toolbox and asked me to teach her how to fix her own cabinet door. I handed her a screwdriver. Grace would have loved that. Months later, Claire told me something I never forgot. The worst part wasn't that he made plans, she said. It was realizing he thought my voice was just an obstacle. That is what control does. It calls itself love while quietly removing every choice from the person it claims to protect. I am 63 years old now, and I still drive executives a few mornings a week. Most of them do not look twice at me. That is fine. I have learned that invisible people often hear the truth first. And if there is one thing I know, it is this. Real love does not need an audience to prove itself. Real love listens before it leads. Real love does not build a cage and call it a home. If you have ever watched someone mistake control for love, or if you have ever had to tell a painful truth to protect someone you care about, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Martin did the right thing by waiting until Claire could see the truth for herself? If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps and encourages us to keep bringing you new stories like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.